Greetings viewer! Today I have the privilege of driving the brand new BMW M3 Competition. This is the 6th ever M3 and it probably marks one of the biggest departures in the nameplate's history. Firstly, it is based on the new 3 Series, which is it is as big as the E39 5 Series. So this new M3 is about the size of an older M5. Most European cars have steadily been growing over the last few generations, and the 3 Series is no exception. This latest M3 sedan packs what BMW calls its S58 6-cylinder engine. It has twin turbos and it makes 510 horsepower and 650 Newton meters of torque. There's also a 480 horsepower version in the non-competition model. And that lower powered version of this engine is the only one you can get with a manual 6-speed gearbox. You cannot have the competition model with the stick shift. This new M3 is also the first M3 ever available with xDrive all-wheel drive. BMW says that the all-wheel drive version of the M3 will be the most capable of them all. And it quotes it as being able to sprint to 100 kilometers per hour from standstill in 3.5 seconds versus 3.9 seconds for this rear-wheel drive competition model. And even though this latest M3 is the best M3 at putting its power down, even though it's the most powerful M3 ever, it still can't quite put all of that power down. Which is why in the first 2 gears, you don't get the full 650 Newton meters, only from 3rd onward. And I'm pretty sure that for the all-wheel drive version, which will be able to put all that power down, BMW won't limit torque in the lower gears, at least not as much. And I'm sure that's where the acceleration boost comes from. After spending some time with this car, I really began to like it. Obviously, I liked the idea of an M3, but the execution needed to be good, and it is very good. It has to be said that BMW has done an honorable job of making a torque converter shift gears very briskly indeed. You still have this button on the gear selector that allows you to choose between 3 settings for gear shift severity. And if you crank it all the way up, it does a very good job of shifting very quickly. It's just over 100 milliseconds, BMW says, for each shift. And one problem area for torque converter automatics was giving you lower gears when you're downshifting at high RPMs. Many transmissions just don't want to shift down. This one in the M3 though is actually not bad at all. This transmission is a real Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde affair. It has 2 very distinct personalities. I would obviously vouch for the manual, although I have not driven a manual, because you will definitely have more fun in that on a track, although it won't be as quick, both because of the extra power that you get in automatic cars, and because you really need to have both hands on the wheel in this car when you're driving it quickly. So the fact that it has these quite big paddle shifters is really good, and you won't feel like you're missing out on too much control. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, even though this is a torque converter automatic, when you put it in manual, it works like any good sequential gearbox, just not as brutal. The suspension also deserves praise, because this car rides on 19-inch wheels up front and 20s at the back, but the ride is remarkably good. When the suspension is in comfort, the vehicle isn't perhaps quite as sharp as you would expect it to be. But you can put the suspension in Sport Plus, and the steering and the brakes. Oh, by the way, this car has configurable brakes, which is something new for the M3. I'm not sure why you would want less responsive brakes, so I just keep them in their touchiest setting at all times. And to me, they don't seem overly sensitive. The steering, while it's very direct and sharp, even in comfort mode, although it's not ideal in comfort mode, is a bit too light and vague for my taste, even when you put it in its sportier setting. I'm not questioning its precision, but I would want it to be a bit stiffer than it is. So out on the road, with its settings dialed down slightly, this car is quite comfortable and civilized. I also had the chance to drive it on a track. I have a short video, a separate video, which you can check out. There's a link in the description. And on track, I got to play with this car's M Dynamic Stability Control, which has 10 different traction control settings. You first have to disable the stability control, and then you can adjust that setting. I drove the car with it cranked all the way up to 8, 10 being the maximum, the most assistance that you can have. And the nannies really kept the car under control. The rear end hardly slid out, it didn't really. Then I cranked it down to 4, and the M3 became a much more interesting machine. You started to have to correct it as you slammed on the gas out of corners, but it was never intimidating, it was always fun. I had an absolute blast throwing this car around the track. And when on track, these optional, very body-hugging seats came into their own. And even though they have this weird carbon element in between your legs, which you can remove and fit a harness to this seat, it's really nowhere near as uncomfortable as you might expect just looking at it. The regular M3 seats are still pretty good, and they hold you in place. But frankly, these also add to the interior ambiance, which in vehicles without the carbon pack is, well, it could be better. You don't feel as special as in some older M cars in this latest one. Yes, you do get the special motorsport steering wheel with the 2 M buttons, but for instance, these big carbon pedals behind the wheel, which are fixed to the steering wheel itself and not the column, as you've come to expect from BMW. So the paddles, these bigger paddles, they're only available with the carbon pack, as far as I'm aware. And without them, without the seats and without the carbon trim, you could frankly be in any 3 Series. You don't feel like you're in an M car. Yes, sure, this gear selector is very nice. It has an embossed M here, as well as the 3 color stitching on the wheel and on the selector itself. But those are very subtle touches that many people might not even notice. So while at first I was skeptical about these bucket seats, I can thoroughly recommend them. They are more comfortable than you would expect. I did spend some time in the passenger seat in this car, and if you're a passenger, this carbon element from between your legs might become annoying on longer journeys, because when you're in the driver's seat, your legs are kind of in the same position, especially if it's an automatic car. But as a passenger, you tend to move around and fidget in your seat more. I would also like to point out that getting into this car, ingress, is made extra difficult by the very high bolsters on the side here. The programmable M buttons are a very nice touch because you can have 2 distinct modes tailored to your needs. For instance, I have one of them with all settings in maximum attack mode, and another with all settings in maximum attack mode except for the suspension, which is in comfort. And that's how I drove this car. That's how I'm driving it right now. The M3 also has an active exhaust that has valves that open and close and make it louder from the outside. And when you put the powertrain in Sport Plus, the car starts piping in fake noise into the cabin, fake engine noise through the speakers. It's well done though, and you don't really notice it at first. You eventually start to notice it. Most people who have only seen this car in photos and videos will say they don't like it. Or they hate it. They absolutely hate it. For me, I don't mind the grille that much. In fact, it actually grows on you the more you look at the car and the more time you spend with it. And I absolutely love the look of this car from the outside. I really, really, really do. Especially in this color. And there's nothing understated about this car's exterior. It really looks like it means business. And since it's a real brute, it's a 500 plus horsepower rear wheel drive brute, it needs to look the part, and it does. It really does. The wheel arches are blistered, front and rear, and because the 3 Series is more narrow than the 4 Series, yet both the M3 and the M4 use the same wide rear axle, so they have the same track width. For the M3, BMW has had to blister the rear arches even more. And it looks like some sort of touring car. It's brilliant. Some people have criticized the area where the blistered arches meet the rear doors, saying that maybe a set of bespoke rear doors or a piece of plastic trim might have made things look better. But honestly, I don't have a problem with that area either. And I also love the wheels that come on this car. Unless you want to go for the M Performance wheels, you actually only get one rim design for the competition, but you can choose, I think it's up to 4 different color finishes, and they all look brilliant. The non-competition M3 does come with 18s up front and 19s on the rear, but if you want the competition with the extra power, then that comes as standard with 19s and 20s. I also like the design of the front bumper. Mostly, I think it could have been a bit less busy. There are a bit too many lines that mix there, and it could have been a bit cleaner, I think. The rear bumper is also quite good. I love the ginormous quad exhausts, which, it has to be said, make a rather nice noise, even if this car is fitted with a particulate filter. Overall, I absolutely adore the G80 M3. Sure, you feel that it's a 1750 kilo car, especially when you're throwing it around the track, but BMW has somehow managed to hide the weight, in true BMW tradition, because it's a manufacturer that makes all its models, even its tall and heavy ones, handle brilliantly. So when applying that knowledge to a low and sporty sedan, the result can only be good. Amazing. It's brilliant. It's wonderful. Buy one if you have the money. Get it with xDrive if you feel like it's a bit too daunting to keep it on the road with this much power and only one driven axle. But it's a wonderful car. I also recently posted a review of the new M4, the G82. And I took that to a twisty mountain road, to my favorite twisty mountain road that isn't too far from Bucharest. And I had a blast with it, even if we were blessed, air quotes, with very British weather. So check that out. And until I see you again in the next video, take care.